Good morning. This is Bill from Curious Cars and Auto Europa Naples on it's a slightly improved Florida, I don't know what the hell today is, Wednesday, I guess, morning. It's wet. It's got a pissy little shitty rain that's been going on, which hasn't been too much fun. But it means that there's a front coming through, so we're going to get at least a couple of days of cooler weather. I'm not going to be miserable. I think the high today is somewhere in the low 70s, and all is basically well with the world, at least for a couple of days. It's not going to last. I looked at the 10-day forecast, and frankly, it's going to turn to shit pretty quickly. But at least for now, I can go through life a little bit chipper, a bit more of a pep in my step, and pretend that, things are going to be okay for a while, even if that just isn't the truth at all. Today, well, real quick, okay, what do we have? I'll give you a quick update. So, news-wise, not much. It's, everything's just going the same. Animals, there were a couple of rabbits on the road today. They didn't do anything untoward. They darted around a little bit. None tried to end their lives in front of this Oldsmobile, and otherwise it was quiet. There were no deers, although I've seen a few of them back lately. Obviously, the treatments that the neighbors have been doing here haven't been working, so they're still around, but they're not bothering anyone, which is good. In the yard here today, not a bird, not a rabbit, nothing. So with the weather and the low animal count, I have to say things are going fairly well for me. After the last video where that big flock of birds was up in that tree and I thought I was going to get attacked, hopefully nothing like that happens today, and we can just carry on with the video. I see their reflection in the windshield. I spoke too soon. But those things come back. Anyway, the hell with it. We're going to move forward. And what I have today is a 1994 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme Convertible. This was a car of my youth. I know I say that a lot, but frankly, that's what I'm drawn to when I'm, out trying to find cars and buying them and whatnot. I go with stuff that I'm kind of familiar with. I was sort of coming of age when these cars came out, so they mean something to me. I had some time in them. I was around them when they were new, and, like anybody else in the world, to some extent, I'm a product of my era. So it's a bit of a joy for me to review a car that is from my time frame, and this car certainly qualifies. If you believe that this is a real convertible, I do. Some people don't. But if you do, then it's the first one that Oldsmobile had made since the 1975 Delta 88, which was a full-size car. The Cutlass convertibles had been phased out a few years before that, when the Colonnade coupes came out. So 75 had been the last year for an Olds convertible. When this one came out, what the hell was it, 91, it ended a pretty long drought of Cutlass convertibles in the world, and would actually end up being the last Oldsmobile Cutlass convertible to come out, before the brand would assume room temperature, in 2004 or something. So that to me is a little bit special. It's based on the famous, or maybe even infamous, GM 10 platform. I'll link to that video in the description. I did a Buick Regal a while back where I really expounded on the GM 10 platform and what it was all about. But the infamous part is because they spent $7 billion developing it. Back then, $7 billion in 85 $6. That's like $17 billion today. Like 15 times or more what Lexus spent developing their LS sedan, which was wildly successful. And the GM coupes were not. A big reason for that, I mean, it's not like they were terrible, although there's some questionable stuff. But, they developed these big personal luxury coupes directly in the middle of Americans making a switch and going into a tizzy for SUVs. So GM really missed the mark on that one. Ford did the same a little bit with the Thunderbirds at the time, but I think it was a little bit easier for them to recover. GM, you know, I know they ended up using that GM10 platform. It later became the W platform. I think the Impala ended up getting based on it, so they did get some money out of it. But I'm just not sure it really did account for that amount of money that they put into it at the time. I can't, it just doesn't seem like a wise GM move to me, but it did replace the very popular G body at the time, and I remember being a little bit disappointed by that because I loved the Grand Nationals. I loved the Hurst Olds and the 442 and the sportier Grand Prix that they had, and you know, they were rear drive, V8, front engine, the kind of stuff I wanted. All of a sudden, you know, they were in that tree. I don't know, what is this, a warning? Jesus, well, we'll keep an eye on these things. All right, anyway, the 3 came out in 1988, and for a short time they sold alongside the remaining G-bodies. The 3 divisions got them at the time: the Buick Regal, the Pontiac Grand Prix, and this, the Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. The Lumina would come later, the Chevy Lumina, but it didn't come off the bat. They were all coupes to begin with. Later on, I think in 1990, the sedans would come out, but only Oldsmobile would get a convertible version. This car here, which debuted in 1991 and lasted through 95. They dragged out the Cutlass name and some other sedans for another couple of years, but only for those 4, 91, 2, 3, 4, 5 model years did they make a convertible GM10 body, and it was only the Oldsmobile that got it. I'm going to say up front that I like this car. I'm going to be honest with you. Maybe it won't be a very proper review in terms of being critical, which I should be critical, but I'm not. I dig this thing, and I like it for a couple of reasons. It's not that it's fast, because it isn't. It's not that it's sporty, because it's not really that either, and it's not, you know, there is some luxury to it, but it's not particularly luxurious. I just like it because I think it's a good car. I think it's relatively well made, but mostly because I think it's interesting. You know, I think it's a true future collectible, good looking, unique and fun to look at, and it does have proper historical roots in the Oldsmobile Cutlass lineup. You know, there's a lot of history to Oldsmobile at the time. They were made famous, the Cutlass Supremes, across 5 generations after becoming their own model in 1966. They were an instant hit. You know, they came out right at the time the personal luxury coupe was taking off. They had a nice feel all to themselves. They felt more expensive than they were. They sold very, very well. And in fact, you get into the late 70s, they were the best-selling car in the United States. There's an unbelievable amount of people who have a connection to an Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. Even in the early 80s, they, you know, the first of the G-bodies, they were selling very, very well. But you know, that went on to decline a little bit. They lost their magic in the mid-80s and early 90s, mostly because of the GM tendency to cross-platform in a really flagrant and obnoxious way, and you know, even create cars that just competed with each other way too much. It ate away at the brand's identity. Nobody said it better than Chevy Chase and Fletch when he was, you know, doing his little notes thing, the narration, and he was following some guy, and he said he was getting into his familiar red Oldsmobile Buick, and I just think that sort of sums it up. I mean, there was a time when GM cars just all looked a bit too damn much like each other. You know, if SUVs hadn't won the day, I think the GM10s and I think this Oldsmobile Supreme, Cutlass Supreme, would have helped bring some of that mojo back. You know, I think it's a uniquely styled car. It really didn't look like anything else on the road. It had, you know, pretty good build quality. It attracted a pretty good number of people. And I think of all the GM10s, I really do believe that. I mean, the Buick wasn't bad. The Pontiac was pretty cool, but I do think the Cutlass Supremes were the best looking of them. They had a visual character that transcended things people wanted. They had a little bit of sportiness, a little bit of luxury, a little bit of elegance, and I just think that had people not made the dash over to to SUVs, these things would have done a little bit more to restore people's faith and loyalty in Oldsmobile, which had certainly waned by that time. And they were going into this spiral where GM would throw a bunch of money and ideas at Oldsmobile to try to revive it until they just finally gave it up in 2004, and yeah, it just went away. But let's take a quick look at 1994. You know, what the hell? Let's see what this car was released to when it was fresh and new upon the world. In the biggest news of the year, by far, and enormous news, was when figure skater Nancy Kerrigan was attacked by a thug with a police baton. He struck her on the knee. I'm sorry to laugh. It really isn't that funny, but, oh, God, it's just funny to think back. It was such a big deal at the time. The TV cameras caught the tail end of it with Nancy yelling, "Why? Why me? Why?" I remember it all very well. And it would soon come out that the thug was sent by the ex-husband of Kerrigan's rival, Tanya Harding, a very classy young girl. And her husband had the ridiculous name Jeff Gillooly. I remember all this. I mean, I hadn't thought about it in years. And then when I was sort of touching up on this video for today, I just had a chuckle reading that stuff. So anyway, Gillooly sends this guy, Shane something, over with a police baton to hit the knee of Nancy Kerrigan, ostensibly knocking her out of the condition and the competition and paving the way for Tanya Harding to take it and go on to riches and glory. It did not work out. It actually culminated in a silver medal at the Olympics for Kerrigan, and a plea deal and really anemic and pathetic sex tape for Harding. It just didn't work out for her at all. Americans badly wanted to make Kerrigan into America's sweetheart and a real hero, but it turned out she was something of a crabby bitch, so the whole thing just kind of went away, and you really don't hear about it anymore. I guess there was a movie a few years later, but I don't think anyone watched it. And that brings us to what, you know, I have to say was truly and inarguably the biggest news of the year. I lied when I said that was. And that was the O.J. Simpson murder. A little bit too much of the coronavirus whiskey this morning. The O.J. Simpson murder saga. And if you remember the slowest car chase in history, it was like watching the Blues Brothers at quarter speed. And that was where a guy named Al Cowling, O.J.'s friend, drove O.J. to try and evade. I don't know what the hell they were doing. Anyway, they drove around in this white Bronco that then became iconic. They interrupted, you know, all sorts of primetime TV while it was going on. So like 90 million people ended up watching this car chase, and it just became the absolute news of the year. It culminated in a widely televised trial. If you remember the Dream Team, and I mean, it was, oh God, at the time it was a big deal. Don't look back on it now. It's just, let's just forget it. And it ended up with O.J. getting off. He was acquitted of all the charges. The glove didn't fit, and he went off to look for the real killers in casinos and bars and golf courses around the country. Speaking of show trials, there was the Michael Jackson married Lisa Marie Presley this year, creating this sort of bizarre connection between the king and the king of pop. And you look back on it now, and it's just as head-scratching as it was then. Who can say for sure? So, in fact, that's just all I'm going to say about that. Ayrton Senna, an incredibly talented young man, actually wasn't that young at the time. He was in mid-30s, but a legendary Formula 1 driver. He was killed in an accident, sending Brazil into a decades-long heartbreak. They're still not over, and creating controversy for his team, Williams Racing, and you know, what might have been some questionable car prep with, you know, drilled steering columns for lightness and such. Apparently, at some point, the steering column broke, leaving Senna as a passenger at, you know, 200 miles an hour, and it just didn't end well for him. Here's one for you. Netscape Navigator was released in 1994. I haven't said those two words aloud in more than 20 years. It became the first commercially viable web browser. It was a pretty big deal, and God, it's just weird to think back to those times when you went to the store or Circuit City to buy a $100 copy of Netscape Navigator, something that later would just come free on everything. Sweden and Norway voted on joining the EU. It was kind of a split decision. The Swedes were in, the Nords were out. The Channel Tunnel opened between the UK and France. The US invaded Haiti to restore democracy. An Estonian ferry sank, killing like 900 people. The Estonian ferry, it was named the Estonia. And the first genetically modified tomato was grown and sold. So, yeah, it's pretty big stuff. Very, very strong year for serial killers. A guy named Frederick West murdering 12 young women with the help of his wife. I couldn't imagine getting nagged incessantly while you're doing your serial killing. I mean, that had to be an incredible bummer, and frankly, it would take the joy right out of it for me. So, God bless him. He went to jail or whatever, but he probably did suffer enough before it all happened. Movies, you had Forrest Gump, you had The Shawshank Redemption, Dumb and Dumber, Pulp Fiction, Speed. With TV, you had The X-Files, you had Law and Order, NYPD Blue, Frasier, and of course Jerry Springer, which was an institution at the time. And music, now in full 90s. Drek mode, whatever you want to call it. You gave us Blind Melon, Snoop Dogg, Sheryl Crow, Alice in Chains, and of course the swan songs of all the popular guys from the 80s. So anyway, all in all, it was a pretty solid year. And a good year to drive this Oldsmobile convertible right through the middle of it. So let's take a quick look at this car. In fact, I'm going to pause for a minute, and then we'll get back and get into the actual review of this specific car. So bear with me. All right, we're back, and no further sign of the birds in the trees. All right, well, let's get into the styling of this car. I think it looks very, very modern. Even by today's standards, I think it looks modern. I think the Oldsmobile designers did an absolutely terrific job on it. The front end has almost what I would call UFO looks, the way the lights sweep in from the sides towards the center. Earlier versions had composite headlights that were all one piece. By this year, by 94, they had switched to these petite quad lights that had shared with the Pontiac Grand Prix. They've gone away now, and I still think they look pretty damn cool today. I like the way the bumper has there's sort of the ridges in it, for want of a better word. The Oldsmobile script is burned into the driver's side of it. You've got big outlets for the fog lights that are recessed. You've got, you can see where it sucks air underneath there for the radiator. Very nice composite front end that I think does quite nice in terms of styling. I even like the Oldsmobile rocket badge in the center. I think it all just came together. Nice subtle lines in the hood, not too gaudy and not too, just a very understated, almost German, if you will. And I suppose this was part of that restyling of American cars. Oh, God, there we go. Part of that restyling of cars to look kind of European. There are a variety of wheels available on these things. These are probably my second or third favorite. I like the ones that were earlier, and they looked like a bunch of Christmas trees coming to a point in the center. I like the cladding down the side of it. That's also a bit Euro in its application with the, again, with the indentations in it. You've got the Cutlass Supreme logo at the front of the door in the middle. You got interesting little trim around the wheel wells, presumably to keep water in so you can start rusting. Probably the largest or most notable design feature of these convertibles is that structural bar in the center, and those aren't my words. I think that's what Oldsmobile called it. Now, I mean, I don't think it's a roll bar, maybe, but I don't think so. I have a feeling that thing folds faster than Superman on laundry day if the thing goes over. In fact, why that bar is there mostly is because GM put the door handles on the GM10 cars up in that B pillar in the center of the car. you know, could they have moved it? Yeah, but then you're making, you know, different doors for a very limited production car, and that probably didn't pass GM cost-cutting measures at the time. So the convertibles were made by a pretty fascinating company called Cars and Concepts, started by a guy who used to work at manage Hearst, and not just with the shifters. You remember Hearst used to do all the T-tops and stuff on the 70s cars. Actually, in fact, Cars and Concepts ended up buying Hearst at some point, I believe. But this guy, I think his name was Dick Chrysler, if I remember right, no relation. And he ended up building this company that would then do lots of convertibles and converts for major production cars in the 80s and 90s. They did stuff you might not have known they did, like the Ford Mustang convertible, and there was going to even be a DeLorean convertible at one point, but then all the controversy happened at the wrong time. This wasn't the first Olds convertible. In fact, there was a very limited production of these things made by Cars and Concepts in 1988 to pace the Indy 500 at the time. And usually they make a bunch of those cars, you know, to spread around all the dealerships, some of them with graphics on the side, you know, many of them that never had anything to do with Indy. Well, in this case, they only made 50 of them. All of them were used to either pace the race or take part in the festivities. They had every conceivable option known to man, stuff that you wouldn't have for years later. In fact, these cars, these Oldsmobiles, had the first heads-up display from GM. That didn't come out on the Corvette till quite a few years later. So in many ways, they were pretty groundbreaking. But anyway, they only made 50 of these things. After the race, they had some select dealers that would get them, and they sent them off. Then they discovered there was some issue with federalizing them, or, you know, making them legal. So they decided to take them all back and crush them, and they'd give dealers credit. Quite a few of the dealers did send them back, but a few said, you know, the hell with that. I mean, this thing is going to be gold. In particular, a guy in Erie, Pennsylvania named Tom Knobloch, he wouldn't send it back to GM at gunpoint. So he put one away, recognized that that was going to be a pretty rare and incredible piece of GM history, and saved it from the crusher. His family went on to sell it after his death, a good few years later. But they were pretty unique and interesting cars, and a cool little story from the Indy 500. To true convertible fanatics, that bar on the top is a deal killer. It makes it not a real convertible. There was certainly at the time, maybe less so today, but at the time, quite a few people said, no, it's not a real convertible. Truly, the 75 Delta is the last one. But, you know, I disagree. I actually think the bar looks kind of sexy. I get that it's kind of a hodgepodge that is meant to retain the door handles, and frankly, the seat belts, I might add. They're also built into the doors of the car, and that's why they did it. But I do think it gives it kind of an interesting and sporting look that is unique to the time and still looks pretty unique today. So I tell you what I'm going to do. Speaking of the convertible, earlier today I had the top up. I'm not going to lie and say I'm going to do it all now. It's already been pre-filmed, but I'm going to pause so I can interject the top part so you can see this thing when that thing's up and how it looks, and then we'll get back into it. Okay, here it is with the top up. You can see that it's white. I guess you'd call this double white since the body and the top are white. It's probably a good thing the interior of the car isn't white as well. Then you'd have triple white, and that could very well violate Twitter rules. So you can see it's a nice form-fitting top, nicely mimics the roofline. It's got a glass rear window with the frost. Looks to be in pretty damn good original condition, as frankly it should be on this car, and everything nice and proper. So let's get that down, see how that works. An infernal GM beeping. I'm going to crank it up for this just so we don't drain the battery. What else am I going to do? Okay, it seems like if you hit these two rear window switches at once, it's going to run all four windows down. We'll give that a shot. Yeah, and it does. Okay, so we've got all four down. Now up here, we just release these guys. It's underneath the headliner somewhere. All right, there we go. And here's the convertible top button, and we want to put it down. And just like any Oldsmobile convertible of days past, down it goes. Very nice and simple, and can all be done from the comfort of the driver's seat. So have a look at that, and then we're going to get the top boot back on and see where we're at. So there you go. There is the top in the down position. Looks like it needs a little push to get the boot on, but we'll get that going now. So obviously that's something I'm not going to do one-handed, so I'll pick it up again in a minute. All right, so boot's back in place, and let's just get on with it. Let's have a look inside the trunk. There at the back, you can see the pretty attractive taillights, simple, like the reverse lights in the center underneath the deck lid, like the ridges on that bumper being carried over, the sunken plate. I just think it looks all very cool. Let's have a look inside and see what we got. It has to be said, this car is actually very functional as a convertible, much more so than a lot of cars that were even made much later on. You can see you could fit all kinds of crap in there with pretty much zero issues at all. Those are the original floor mats for the car. And I mean, this thing only has 17,000 miles, so it should be in good shape. They're using kind of that cheap GM stuff, you know, the carpet, but they do a nice job of lining it all. There's a little donut spare under there. They do a nice job of finishing the trunk so it looks a little bit, you know, higher end than otherwise. This car does have VIN stickers everywhere, which were nice for theft at the time. And there's, what the hell do you have there? Your tire chart. So anyway, everything looking good in the trunk and otherwise not particularly remarkable. Have a look under the hood. Interesting place where the hood latch is, and that's in this little guy right here. Why they put that there, I don't know, but maybe it makes sense. Let's have a look under here if I can find that latch. Okay, so here we have, this is the 3100, the 3.1 liter V6. This came out after that anemic carryover 2.8 and became the standard engine on these cars. You could get a few different versions of engine in these things, and even a couple of transmissions. The 3.1 is probably the most prolific. Initially, of course, it had the 2.8. For a time, there was the Quad 4, if you remember that thing. I don't know if that came in Oldsmobiles or not. It probably did. I think it was an Oldsmobile engine, at least the way they marketed it. So they had Quad 4s for a while. And then finally the 3.4, which I think shared this block, but had a double overhead cam setup and was kind of the hot motor at the time, put out 200 horsepower. You could get a 5-speed manual in some of them, which is pretty neat to think of you shifting your Oldsmobile down the road. I don't believe you could in the convertibles, but you certainly could in the coupes and I believe in some of the sedans. Most of them had a 4-speed, you know, GM prolific, you know, cross-brand 4-speed automatic, a turbo hydra of some variety, that's thought of as pretty bulletproof and a pretty good trans. And back when they didn't have 84 gears like they do now, the gears were nicely spread apart. It downshifted to a gear that you could easily predict, and the car always seemed to know exactly what gear it was going to be in. And frankly, I just don't see that as something that's carrying on today with all these 8, 9, 10-speed things that are around. It just seems a bit strange to me. You had a 4-wheel independent suspension. You had 4-wheel disc brakes with optional ABS. Later that became standard. You know, you could get a 5-speed, you could get a twin cam. You know, all in all, it was a pretty hot setup for, you know, basically an anemic car of the 90s. You know, if you look at the stats, and I felt the same way when I did that Thunderbird a while back in Cougars, there were a lot of interesting bits and pieces you could get on those cars that made them a bit hotter than I remember. And I think that's probably because they were competing with the your memories of all the rear drive V8 cars. So I tell you what, I'm going to pause again for a second, get my crap inside the car, and then we're going to go for a spin. All right, let's have a look inside. So here in the back, you can see everything looks nice and proper. And again, I say, what a functional convertible. You've got tons of leg room. Your Canadians, even tall ones, are going to be pretty damn chipper. You can fit 3 of them across with no issues. They give them ashtrays, so they'll be able to smoke. They got that going for them. You got a big-ass speaker back there. You got a power window switch for the rear little quarter windows here, which are, of course, fixed on the coupe, but go down in these. And, you know, other than a complete and total lack of gun storage and nowhere to strap down an infant, you've got a pretty good back seat. Again, these little door handle setups I think are kind of neat. This is an illuminated keyhole. GM did this as a trick. You see the way the seatbelt is part of the door on this car, which is frankly awkward, but here's what it does that helps things out. When these cars first came out, airbags were only just coming into their own, and there was a rule that I want to say it was 90 or 91 that cars either had to have passive seat belts or an airbag, and the car makers were having trouble getting their airbags together, and passive seatbelts meant that they had to go on you kind of automatically. And quite a few car companies came up with this thing where you would hop in and the seatbelt would be on a track up here at the front on the A-pillar, and then click, 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 come back down and get itself over the top. It was really awkward and weird, and not everybody liked it, but at least it got them away from not having to, or at least made it legal, you know, so they could actually make the damn car. But GM decided to put them in the door. That way, theoretically, you could leave the belt attached when you opened it, and it would become a passive seat belt. Up front, you can see pretty stylish and sporty looking bucket seats. There were some versions of this car that had quad buckets. You'd actually have 2 rear bucket seats with the center console in the back, and it was pretty neat stuff. And again, one of the reasons that I like this generation of car is they were starting to do some more unique stuff to make the interiors less of that GM dreck of the 80s and more unique to the vehicle. And being the early 90s, this thing's just button heaven. But anyway, lovely, nice, big supportive seats with a tremendous amount of side bolstering, which is weird for, you know, an American car. They recline. You can see it has the same seat controls a 72 Cadillac might have, but and in a really sort of awkward spot that's hard to reach when the door is down, but it does have nice power seats. You've got your window controls here that are all illuminated, you know, interesting looking vinyl-y ridged things. I mean, I think it does make a nice, you know, taking GM's crappy build quality and crappy materials and making something out of it that looks pretty good probably wasn't an easy task for the engineers, but I think they did pull it off pretty good on this car. You also have a neat little map pocket, which would be a nice place to stick a compact 9mm. All right, let's fire it up. You got that GM passcode thing too. That's what passed for security at the time. I think it was added like an extra 3 seconds to the amount of time it would take for a criminal to steal your car. Alright, it was a little bit disappointing to me that this car didn't have the big fancy electronic dashboard that was so popular back then. But of course back then people didn't, there was a big contingent of people that said they hated it and they wanted to have analog gauges back. So this must have been one of the cars ordered with the analogs to satisfy them. And you can see it has nice full gauges. You got water temp, you got oil pressure, you got of course 120 mile an hour speedo. At that time the 55 had sort of gone away. Don't even denote 55, which is nice. You've got your tack with a 55, actually a little bit more, almost 6,000 RPM red line. You got a voltmeter, temp gauge, or sorry, a gas gauge, and there you see 17,000 miles on the clock of that sort of rare analog Odo. Over here you have your light controls with dimming, you've got your fog light switch, you've got this super multi-function thing that gives you wipers, washers, cruise control, and high beams all on one stalk. You got the Oldsmobile logo looking at you, got a nice horn, you've got these buttons. These things would wear off in cars with miles on them. You just see these, you know, they'd be all white, all the hieroglyphics would be gone. Nice to see them still here, and it works. Actually, let's turn this, look at all the buttons on this radio. This probably wasn't even remotely their fanciest one. It has like 83 buttons on it. I can do that, and I can turn the volume up here.
Classic rock. 94.5, The Arrow.
Yeah, a little bit of classic rock this morning. Can't believe I don't recognize it yet. Oh yeah, okay. Forgive me. That one's drawing a blank on me. I'm going to get shit for that. See, the original factory black power antenna still works, which is shocking. Over here, and I don't think this is coincidence that the glove box is weird and on top of the dash. I have a strong suspicion that that would have been the place where the airbag was going to go when it would be equipped with a passenger side airbag, but by the time it got that, they'd redesigned the dash. I don't know why that feels loose, but you got these interesting ridged cup rests. I'm not going to call them holders, because obviously you put a cup on there and hit the gas, the passenger's going to be wearing it. God, this is driving me. I hate brain farts like this. What was this, REO Speedwagon? Amanda, I remember that song, and I can't, for the love of God, oh man, you're gonna kill me for that one. You got your electronic climate control there, nice. You got an ashtray here, you got a, what the hell do you have? You got a cigarette lighter, I guess that's all pretty normal. Another little spot to put a handgun, although it's not gonna be concealed. Convertible top switch, or center console shifter. You've got a coin holder, and another little center console container here with a, look at that. It's still functioning, which is beyond a miracle. This was apparently Oldsmobile trying to make a cup holder as you know, fragile as the one BMWs do. You got some map lights in the center view mirror. You got some cocaine makeup mirrors there for the 80s. Lights don't seem to be coming on. I don't know if that's because it's light out or just not working, so who the hell knows. Tilt steering column, nice, and yeah, you know, otherwise fairly simple. So Boston, oh, for the love of God, of course, Boston. You know, they blend into everything else. Let's go for a ride. So, you know, the car is front drive, which is not my favorite. I do feel a minor amount of torque steer, but very manageable. The steering is actually quite heavy. I believe it's rack and pinion. I mean, it's not abnormally heavy, but it's heavier than I expected. It's certainly not one of these steer with your pinky 70s style luxury car things. It does have a bit of a sporty amount of feedback to it, which is actually quite nice. Probably in a car like this, I don't want it necessarily. I'd like to have it a bit more, you know, spin the wheel around like with the palm of your hand stuff. But of course they were trying to make this car a bit more sporty at the time. One winds out, it gives you pretty adequate power. It certainly doesn't fling you back in your seat, but as far as a commuter car goes, it doesn't leave you wanting. I mean, it's not that hard to merge into traffic. It does have a nice downshift. But again, you know, I think the 3.4 gave you a little bit more pep, which would be nice. But I have the feeling that the 3.1 is probably a more reliable engine. As far as cruising goes, you know, that's where this thing is at. You've got the top down, and, you know, even with the bar there, you do feel like you're in a convertible. So, you know, piss off to the guys who say the 75 was the last one, and you're just cruising. And I have to say, man, I think these things make really, really nice modern collector cars. I mean, they're getting old, older than you think if you're my age. Don't do the math, man. You'd be a little bit horrified. This car is what, 26? 20, yeah, 20, that was 6, for 94, you got 6 plus 20. Dude, almost 27 years old, this car. Am I doing that right? Yeah, 27 years old. So this thing is a hell of a lot older than you think. It's certainly past, you know, what could almost be considered antique status. It qualifies for a blue plate in Florida. And, I just can't believe it, man. I can't, it still feels pretty current to me. But, you know, it's easy to fix. The parts are out there. You know, they're not that hard to find. Basically, any mechanical part you need, brakes, gaskets, plugs, all that stuff you can get at O'Reilly's or Western Auto. It's just one of those things that's not a hard car to keep going. I don't know if anyone's still making body parts, but there's probably enough left over the years. They're still easy to find. So there you go. I mean, it really is a very cool looking collector car, dare I almost say classic car now, that you can own and drive for relatively cheap money, look pretty cool, start conversations, have fun with it, cars and coffee, and you know, otherwise enjoy yourself. And frankly, it's fairly safe. It's got an airbag, it's got crumple zones, it's, you know, probably reliable enough to drive across the country, and how do you go wrong? How do you go wrong? So to me, this is just a terrific future collectible, maybe current collectible even, you know, maybe my shtick is old on this one, maybe it's passed over into it. I do know that the prices aren't, you know, I think they're still where they won't be for very long. I have the feeling that the nice one of these are going to start getting more valuable, and it's not a bad car to buy, put away with, have a bit of fun with, drive around a little bit, and you might even sell it for a profit in 5 or 10 years. It's just, you know, it's a fun car to own, and it does have a terrific lineage of Oldsmobile convertibles and products that, you know, make it special. So anyway, there it is. I really appreciate you guys having a look. I want to wish everybody, I don't know if I'll get another video out or not. I'm going to try to, but I don't know. So if I don't, everybody have a really Merry Christmas, whatever culturally appropriate greeting you want, take it as that. And thank you again so much for watching, for subscribing, for checking these things out. I really can't tell you what it means to me. Love reading the comments, and you guys are the best. I tell you what, I say it all the time, and it ain't bullshit. Without this YouTube thing, I just wouldn't be having any fun at all. I really wouldn't. It's a weird, shitty time in the car market. Everybody else is annoying me all the time, and this is my one respite from all of that. So thank you guys very much for being around, for helping me keep it going, and we will see you with the next one. Oh, this car will be for sale at Auto House at Naples, by the way. I don't know if I'm going to get it on the website quick, but it will be for sale. So if you want, give them a call, 239-263-8500. They're on the web at autohousenaples.com. Thanks again for having a look. Really appreciate it, and we will see you with the next one. Take care. God, if there's anything more disgusting to drive behind on a road than a friggin' portable toilet.